All right. So I am going to get your presentation up, Karen.
Okay.
And then I'm just going to go ahead and give a rundown of our plan. So I want to thank everybody for coming out today. We have over 40 people signed up, so I'm sure we're going to have some people kind of trickling in as we get started. But the EWDC, through our research and our data collection initiative, we identified a huge need for record keeping education. Over 40% of all the organizations we work with, so over, we've reached out to over 1,200 and we've gotten responses from over 300. Over 40% of those organizations are relying on paper records, and then a combined nearly 70% are relying on either paper records or just spreadsheets. And we feel that improving record keeping and trying to help you all have more efficient record keeping and easier to keep track of record keeping will go a long way, not just for our own data collection initiative, but really keeping track of the horses in your care and streamlining your own care processes, and hopefully improving your ability to communicate with your donors, with your community, and self-assess the kind of work you're doing in places you can grow and identify the parts of your program that are really successful. So when we recognized that we wanted to launch this initiative, we reached out to a group called W Foresight, who's here with us today to organize these educational webinars. And our hopes is that with these educational webinars, you're able to identify what software systems might be most useful to you, how to start working with a software system if that's what you want to do, and kind of just, if you've never thought about this process at all, or it seems really intimidating, we want to help you feel better about it. So at this point, I will introduce to you Debbie and Karen from W Foresight, but first I want to say we're going to keep the chat closed for now. However, as this is a webinar, there is a Q&A session. So if you go to your Zoom kind of control bar, you'll see a button that's normally where the chat is that says Q&A. And we're going to keep this open for the whole webinar. And if you have any questions, simply type them in the Q&A and we'll answer them live either. Debbie is going to be on the Q&A watch, and she's going to answer them by typing an answer. And then if Karen sees them, she might pop in with a live answer as well while she speaks. So don't hesitate, post any questions you have in the Q&A box. And then at the end, we're also going to do kind of an open Q&A. You can raise your hand and we'll unmute you and take some open questions that way as well. So with that being said, Karen, I'm happy to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Emily. I'm excited about this webinar today. It was one of those long processes that felt like there was so much information. I didn't know how I was going to organize it, and then everything fell into place. So I'm happy to be able to present to you a handful of options. Some of them we're highlighting in this presentation. There are some other software vendors that we reviewed that I think we're making all of, I know we're making all of the information available to you. And hopefully everybody will find something that they can get started with. So we can probably go to the next slide. Emily's going to run slides for me. So if we move on, if you're, obviously this is our custodial program. Okay, so W Foresight, just a really quick overview. If some of you weren't on earlier webinars and focus groups and things, we're an independent software consulting firm. We focus on nonprofit solutions, but we're all about software and helping people to use it better. We are founded in 2009. W was one of the founding partners. We're based in Chicago, but we do work all over the country. That's been helpful during COVID. Obviously, we really didn't travel much as it was. We're luckily able to do a lot remote as it is. We do not take money from vendors to represent or recommend their software. That's part of who we are anyway. And I think that puts us in a good position for making these sorts of recommendations. Not any software vendor is asking to be highlighted here, asking to have a more prominent place in the presentation. Most of them didn't even know if they were going to be featured or not until like last week. So we can go to the next slide. Just very quickly, I'm Karen, or Debbie McCann is on, she's running Q&A. Co-founder and partner. She has a lot of years of experience in software selection implementation. She is a parent of a teenage horsewoman and has been a barn mom for 8 years. I've been working with W Foresight for, I don't know, but it's since January 2019. So before that, was working sort of in the field in nonprofit work. I am fortunate to drive a team of Percheron draft horses as a volunteer, which is a lot of fun. And I am the parent of also a teenage horsewoman and have been a barn mom for about 11 years. So our next slide. So just to overview really quickly, custodial organizations. You have different needs than some of the other organizations that we were sort of profiling. If you take custody of an animal, of a horse, or equine, you do some sort of intake. You find out why they're coming to you, you get the dates, why are they coming to you, who is surrendering them, or what organization or person did they come from, a little bit of information about, that at the point of intake. Then there's an equine profile, which has more information. Obviously, there's breed, color, height, weight, gender. Probably there are some medical pieces of information in there, all sorts of background about that horse. While they're in your care, you're going to provide various services. They might be farriers, vets, different medical treatments, maybe a trainer evaluation, all sorts of different assessments that might take place. The idea is that you then adopt the animal out, hopefully. We know there are a variety of outcomes that could take place, but that's generally the life cycle. And in the meantime, you might need to track people and organizations. So it's the person that surrendered to you, or it's the vet that provided service. Hopefully it is the ultimate adopter that adopted the equine from you. You may also have donors and volunteers. Debbie is doing the presentation on Friday about donor and volunteer management, so we're not going into that today. Some of the software we're talking about may handle those things, but the focus more is on those first 4 vertical panels of intake, profile, service, and outcome. So this is just a highlight. This is certainly not representative of every single requirement that we identified, but everybody, all the software we're talking about represents these different areas to different extents. So the next slide. So what did we do? There's a lot of software out there. The first thing is we got some information from the Equine Welfare Data Collective. We did some focus groups with membership. Debbie and I first brainstormed on what would we need to know about horses. Obviously, the data collection survey is one thing, but it's more than that. It's more than just you keeping information for the survey. It's you keeping that information plus everything else that might help you with your operation. So then we did some focus groups with membership, and they gave us a lot of other ideas of things that they need to keep track of. There was an intern who did some research, and I actually received a list, I think this was from the intern, of 77 different software options out there, and Emily's nodding, yes. So that was a lot. And then we did get a few other recommendations from Emily and Ashley on some specific ones to look into that maybe weren't covered or they knew were important ones to look at. So from there, we did some independent research. We did some really basic research online. If you Google this software name, does anything come up? Can you find anything about it? Because there were some that were on a list that I could really not find any information about online. And that personally, it doesn't give me a lot of confidence in a software provider if I can't find much information about them. So we did also look at some software review sites. These are websites that specifically evaluate and highlight different pieces of software. So we did some research on those to get some ideas about what is the marketplace talking about with these different software vendors. Anything that looked interesting, potentially, I tried to do demos with vendors. Surprisingly, some of them were hard to get in touch with, and I did not get demos from all the vendors I would have liked. Then that is identified in the documentation that we'll be sending later. But we did do them if we could. A couple of systems also offer 14-day trials or fully functioning free test databases. So I spent quite a bit of time in those free databases, playing with them, setting them up, seeing how much I could configure, and then playing with any trial databases as well to see how much I could do to make it suit my needs. So we can go to the next slide. So the big thing to keep in mind is software is always a balancing act, software selection. things really for this group fell into two categories. The software that does equine management. And then really what it comes down to is animal shelter software. Your basic dog and cat animal shelters do a lot of what you're doing in terms of your adoption and rescue organizations. And it's not necessarily meant to, it's just showing that if you need adoption tracking, you may lean more toward animal shelter management, where if you do a smaller volume of adoptions, then you might be okay with equine management. But these were the two primary areas that we really started digging into and investigating. Obviously, equine management software will easily handle your equine related fields. You don't need to customize, you don't need to convert hands to inches or feet or whatever. It's very obvious, but it doesn't always help you with outcomes or adoptions. Obviously, your animal adoption software is going to be very heavy on the adoption information, but might not really be configurable enough that you can track the specific equine related information that you need. So the point is, there's really no perfect solution. Unfortunately, we wish there were, but you just have to look at the pros and cons and things like, we can probably jump to the next slide here. This one goes very much together with the next one. You need to look at the volume of your activity, the cost of the software, and your volunteer time. The volume of your activity, meaning your functionality as well. So what specific requirements do you have? Is it worth giving up a little bit more of your budget to make it easier on your staff? Do you really have no budget and then it's going to put a little bit more effort on your staff to do some things? So these are all what you need to take into account. And when you throw those all in together, hopefully you find out, you end up with the right software for you. So the next slide, we have our first two recommendations. So these two rose to the top for our custodial organizations for a few different reasons. It doesn't mean that other software won't work for you, but these seem to be pretty well suited for a broad variety of organizations, those of whom who may be coming from paper records to software or spreadsheets to software. They're pretty accessible, pretty easy entry point. So I want to point out three other software that is included, pieces or software vendors that are included in this. They are iShelters, Pet Stablished, and Rescue Connection. And we're going to see slides about all of these, so you don't need to necessarily write those down. So we are including information about them on the upcoming slides. Again, there are three other software systems that we looked at, didn't feel they were quite the right fit for the broad variety of organizations, but they might work for you. And again, that information will be provided in all sorts of follow-up documentation. So our next slide, really quickly, Shelter Manager has a very low cost and it's highly configurable. And similarly, Barn Manager, my advantages are listed at the top box and then disadvantages afterward in summary. Barn Manager is also very low cost. It has a very friendly interface and it is equine focused. Shelter Manager does, however, need some careful planning to be effective in your configuration and how you set things up. I definitely would recommend doing something and then testing reports and testing how you would pull the information back out. That's just part of the process. Barn Manager, as a general rule, it kind of lacks adopter capability. There are some things you can use and repurpose in the field or in the software, but it also lacks a pet finder integration. So I know a number of people said that was pretty important. So if you're happy to manually add information to pet finder services, this still may work for you. Again, I don't want to come across as implying that you shouldn't ever even consider it, but you just know what the trade-off is going to be. So our next slide, we're looking at some costs. Yeah, there we go. So the pricing on software is always very interesting. Some companies price by users, some by the number of animals or the number of adoptions. So there's a really big variety. Shelter Manager is $340 per year. These are annual fees. So it's a flat fee regardless of the number of users or the number of animals. And because it's an online cloud-based system, there is no initial setup fee that you used to have to pay for software and then pay like a maintenance package down the road. That's not the case with pretty much any of the software we're presenting today. So $340 is what you can expect to pay per year for shelter manager. Barn manager happens to be free to 501c3 rescue organizations. So that obviously makes it very appealing. And you do need to prove, you need to send your 501c3 letter, get actually approved by the organization, but that is another nice option. Shelter manager is headquartered in England. PayPal is currently the only option for any of their overseas clients, just as an FYI up front, since we're talking about cost. Other considerations, though, that I think are important to bring into this, we're just looking at annual cost, but think about if you have a computer available that staff or volunteers would access, or would you want them all accessing everything on their mobile phones? Are you comfortable with that? Do you have a good enough internet connection that you feel that you could always access the software wherever you are, or do you need an upgrade to your service? Do you need to pay somebody to enter data from existing paper files into a software system if you choose to move ahead with that? So even though we like to really focus mostly on the annual cost, it's important to think about some of those upfront costs as well as you're making your plans. So now we can jump to the next slide. This we're looking at really, really quickly. We're going to come back to this at the very end, but I wanted to give you a little overview, remind you again of the software that we're talking about in this presentation, and give you a little bit of an idea of where it falls in terms of these 6 main categories: cost, intake, staff needs, pet finder, adoption, and law enforcement engagement. So we'll jump to the next. Like I said, we're coming back to this. We'll go into a lot more detail after we see a little bit about the software. So what we wanted to do now is provide you a little bit of an idea of the look and feel of these software systems. They'll vary quite a bit. So we tried to get the same set of slides from every software, because only 2 of them had demo databases available that I could get into easily and configure and do what I wanted. I was able to get any screen I wanted to. The others, I did have to rely on the vendors to provide me what I was asking for. And some of them did a great job and some of them didn't send as much as I might have liked. But we have what we have, and you'll be able to get into trial databases of anything that we show here today. So we're going to be looking at a main screen, an idea of the menu and navigation of the software, what an animal profile looks like, what a person profile looks like, and then how do the activities look, like treatments, vaccinations, farrier visits, evaluations, things like that. So, all right, let's look to the next one. Our first one is Shelter Manager. We're going to look at some screens there so we can go to the next screen. So it's a little hard for me now to point, but if you look at the paw print, and then to the right, you'll see ASM, Move, Medical. That's the overall system-wide navigation. And this is what it looks like the moment you log into your database. So that gives you an idea of what's available. There's a huge section on financial, a bunch on publishing, which is what integrates with the pet finder services. And then there are some quick links in that light blue area. And then it's nice because it surfaces a lot of information to you. So what animals have had recent changes to them? You can click right on one of those buttons. It obviously must be male and female if they're pink and blue. And you can click right into the animal's profile and see what has changed about them, a little bit more detail. It also then gives you some highlighted, there's this diary for demo, a timeline, so you can start to see all the latest activity on all the animals, some alerts, there's a message board. So it really is nice that the moment you log in, you can glance and see everything that's going on. So our next slide. This is what, if I click on ASM, I've seen this listed both as Animal Shelter Manager and as Shelter Manager. So I think that it used to be Animal Shelter Manager, and some of that language is apparent in the software. So ASM is the Animal Shelter Manager. If you click on that, there's a little white arrow next to it. This is the screen that you get. So this is meant to give you a little bit of an overview of the menu, the navigation, what things look like. Under animals, you can see the different types of information you can access, like a shelter view. If you want to look up an animal, you want to add a new one or add a log entry for an animal. So all the different areas that you can start to access through the software. So like I said, I just clicked on ASM or Animal Shelter Manager, and I can see these broad categories. So if we go to the next slide, this is a short form for a new animal. what I wanted to highlight here is this registered name is a field that I was able to add to the database and name it registered name and place it on this sort of short form. So I didn't test every possible option, but the concept is nice that you can add kind of a short form if you need to do a very quick intake, and then you have paperwork that identifies all sorts of other information, but you need to do a quick intake and these are the important fields to add, put them on your short form. And underneath, you can see the boxes, the buttons that say create and edit, create or reset. And if you create and edit, it opens up the larger animal profile screen with all the other information in it that you might want to add after, you know, things settle down a little bit. If you just click create, it will still create the record for you, and then you could maybe go back later and look it up and add more information. So also I wanted to point out that entry category, it's defaulted as unable to cope for this poor cat. And that is definitely something I didn't highlight it, but the entry categories are definitely a table that we can add values to. So we could make those match the fields that are necessary in the data collective survey. So that's nice to know. Let's go to the next screen. So in this case, I did the create and edit, and I added a picture up in the upper left. There is the horse named Milo, and there's a little bit of information about him at the top. It lets me know he's a male horse, his age, where he's located, and how long he's been in the shelter. If he had left the shelter, that would be there, the date he entered the shelter. So it's really nice to see a lot of that information at the top. If I clicked on this menu navigation, here's animal. This is showing me all the information about Milo. And then you can see all those other buttons allow me to add other information like his vaccinations or license or a diet information, costs if I needed to cost things out for him. So again, this actually could potentially be helpful for your own animals as well as any animals that you're just temporarily taking into custody. The yellow highlighted fields are also items that I was able to customize the table entry for. So I indicated that he is I was kind of playing around. So sometimes I have like, in some other screenshots, I'll have Tobiano in the color and not Sorrel because I was all over the place playing with things. But you can add equine specific colors, which is nice, instead of just calling him brown or brown and white. The species I was able to add, so you could add all of the different types of equine that you get, or might foster or might take custody of. Again, the breed, I was playing around. Location on your property, you can fill that in. And then of course, there's the registered name that was also on my short form as well. So, okay, I think that's it for this screen. So this is, oh yeah, okay. So this is a person profile. It looks pretty similar to the equine or the animal profile, but I looked up Katinka, I don't know how to pronounce her last name. She is a Norwegian farrier. And I thought that was just kind of fun to put in a real person. You can add flags in here. If you see that blue bar that says name and address, I couldn't get a good screenshot because as soon as I closed that, I tried to show name and address and person type. But when you try to open one, the other automatically closes. So it wasn't good for screenshots, but you can flag people as vets or farriers, and then that allows them to be connected to any sort of activity. So I liked that feature. You can put licensing information in there for them, citations, trap loans. So again, I'm using this to put information about my farrier in here. This could certainly be somebody that you loaned a trap to, or somebody that you've taken an animal from, and there are maybe citations related to that. Maybe, you know, there's a lot of different ways that you could potentially use this, but a person is in here for a variety of reasons. So our next slide, this shows some treatment activity. So this is what this might look like. This is where the software goes a little bit in a different direction. You can see I've clicked on, I was initially on animal, and now the blue highlight or the blue button is vaccination because that's the button that I'm on and that's the menu information we're looking at. I didn't really dig in a lot on test and medical and clinic. The main reason is that I wanted to put something in here that lets me know the farrier needs to come every 6 weeks. And so vaccinations were the only area I was able to put in a vaccination and then put in the next scheduled vaccination. So that's why it shows up here that it was given 10/28 and expires on 12/22. That just means that the farrier is due again in December to come and trim hooves. I also had set up James Harriet as our veterinarian who came and gave some vaccinations. So this is also kind of nice because even though I'm repurposing the farrier visit as a vaccination, it just summarizes everything into one to-do list and one list of everything that's needed. So that is it for shelter manager. So we're going to move on to our next slide of barn manager. So we can go ahead. This is the main screen that I grabbed just from their website, quite honestly. So it's a little generic, but it gives you an idea of the look and feel, which is very clean, very user-friendly looking. And it shows you this whiteboard on the left of the screen. It's got a navigation along the top where it says, here's your overview, your horses, your calendar, conversations, records, and lists, and this nice timeline of a different activity. And you can choose to show or hide different timeline pieces when you add them. So this is kind of a nice view. If we click on the next screen, this gives you an idea of what it looks like on a mobile device. This is one that the vendor actually sent me. So that's a kind of a nice look and nice that it really is very mobile friendly. Our next screen here, it is time for my glasses. So again, Barn Manager being an equine management software, it has height in there in hands, it has breeds, it has markings, and the sire and dam and the foal date as opposed to just birth date. So it's kind of nice from that perspective. Information, you can install the location, you can put in microchip information. So it's kind of nice that this is a horse profile, pretty specific to horse. So the next screen, this is a medical treatment screen. It doesn't tell me a lot because I did not use this on my own and really get my hands in here. I don't know for certain if you can schedule the next vaccination, but I know that in the test data that they would allow you to access for a couple of weeks, you would definitely be able to test that and see. So it's my presentation, unfortunately, is more limited than I would like, but I wanted to point that out. The next screen here, they have some really wonderful videos, actually. They only sent me a couple of screenshots and then referred them to their YouTube channels. So some of these are their own designed, here's a short 4-minute video on how to do this in Barn Manager. And the second link is to the user submitted how I use Barn Manager videos. They did tell me that they have a number of rescue organizations that use their software. And I think it's the person who is leasing, that's how the software is built for the person who leases a horse, is what they're repurposing to be the adopter. So if you have a lower volume of adoptions, it still might be a good option for you. It's not really adoption information, but it's a place to store a person who can be linked to a horse. So these are live links. So when you do get the PowerPoint, the PDF of the PowerPoint, you will be able to click on these and go to those YouTube sites. So our next is iShelters. Very colorful logo here. iShelters is another one of those that does have an online demo database. So animal or shelter manager wipes their database out every night. So once you start playing in it, plan to try and spend a chunk of time, because if you go back, if you do something tomorrow and you go back on Wednesday, everything you set up will be gone. That's just how they've set their demo database up. iShelter, you get your demo database and you'll have it for however long you need it. So the nice thing there is that if you want to play with it over a week or so, you don't have to worry about setting everything back up again. Everything that you put in on Tuesday will be there on Wednesday. So just FYI. This is the screen that you see when you log in. So over kind of underneath that quick search bar on the upper right, you'll see admin shelter. If you're playing with it, be prepared to log into both and kind of go back and forth. Admin shelter is where you set up your table entries and you set up your new tables. So once you're logged into one, or once you're logged into both of them, you really just toggle back and forth between the two. But I wanted to point that out to anyone who wants to get logged in and start playing around. So this is the screen when you log in. I didn't really have any shelter announcements or any system announcement. So this is a little dull looking, but it does give you the tabs, that navigation, the little gray tabs that say animals, people, shelter, office, reports, and help. So our next screen, if I clicked on animals, this is the kind of list I would see. So straight up, first thing is you can add an animal, but then it surfaces some lists for you of what are my active animals. What if I looked at my active animals by location, it would sort all the animals into the locations. You know, maybe they're different barns or different paddocks or even stalls within barns. So that's kind of nice. So there's a huge variety of things that it brings to the surface for you. All the alerts of medical checkups and things that need to be done from that perspective. And then you can search and browse too. Okay, so this look is really replicated. I clicked on animals. If you clicked on people or shelter, you would see a similar type of list of all the different activities you could take. And if we click on the next screen, I did in this one click on office. And I like this because it surfaced all the things that I might need to do. Like, here's my timesheet. If I'm a staff person, I might need to log in and log some hours. If I'm a volunteer, I might need to do that. Different alerts on the left or on the right, sorry, for things that I might need to make sure I take care of. So I liked that feature a lot. And if we click on the next screen, so for the animal profile screens, there are about 4 of them. So the way this works is it really just scrolls down through the screen. It's not like we're looking at it and we're clicking from one slide to the next. Keep in mind that I'm just when I'm using the software, I'm actually scrolling down different parts of the screen. So all of these little colorful icons underneath Update View Animal are the different areas you access for the animal. I'm going to be honest that I found those kind of confusing and difficult and a little bit cumbersome. There's a lot of them too. So just a warning, be prepared to sort of like sit down and figure those out. They weren't immediately intuitive to me. If you hover over an icon, it does give you a little pop-up so that you know what it is. You don't have to click into it in order to realize that you're in the wrong place. On the left are some nice kind of shortcuts. It'll show you the current or last location of an animal, the latest health stats, boarding information, who they're assigned to, some reporting information. And then on the right is sort of the core animal profile. So again, I added my horse, IZ Heaven, alias is Milo, equine, he's a pinto, secondarily a quarter horse. I think the code is automatically added by the system, but you can see some other information here. I could put an adoption fee in if I wanted to. The next screen is a little misleading. Before we go to that, I want to make sure I point out, if you look on the left and you go down near the bottom where it says reports, and it says medical history, personal history, expense history. If I click on medical history, you'll see what's on the next screen. So we can click over to that. I like it because it does, Emily, could you move ahead one more? I don't want to start talking. Oh, there we go, perfect. So if you click on that medical history on the previous screen, it rolls everything up nicely into one view. So all your vaccinations are there, all your medications, procedures, checkups, everything is in one view, which I did really like. Those are all represented by different icons on the animal profile page. So that was a nice feature. And then it's got a printer-friendly version. If you look in the upper right corner, you can print it out. So let's go to the next screen. So if you imagine, we're still scrolling down on our screen. We've got some recent dates on the left, the financial information. You know, does he have friends that he would like to be with and kept with? Litter information obviously doesn't apply, but it's nice to have that information available. You can see all the other types of fields that are already built in. I did not add any of these fields at all. These all come with the system. And I was able to add entries that made sense to me, like the primary color, again, was just Tobiano because I was playing like crazy. Yeah, I think that's it for the next. Yeah, okay, we can scroll to the next screen. This again, I wanted to show you just to show what kind of information. There's a big text box for general comments. There's another area for hidden comments if you didn't want those to show up in reports. Any distinctive features, and then some bio information. I think, but I couldn't really test. I think this information will show up then on a pet finder service if you upload to that. On the right side, under behaviors, I wanted to point out that I actually did add two. These are nice checkboxes. So poor ground manners and very spooky are things that I added that might be applicable to a horse that you might want to highlight, certain things that somebody who's looking to adopt might need to know. And yeah, okay, I think that's it for that one. The person profile, you can see, looks very similar to the animal profile. There's some highlighted information on the left. We still have our little icons along the top. And I've put in Katinka again, who is our farrier. To point out here, I did add farrier and veterinarian as specific types. So again, I like that configurability for me. I want to be able to look at this and know right away, she's our farrier, or this person is our veterinarian. So that's really helpful. The interesting thing about this is she needed her own actual user account, which I can set up a user account in iShelter, but that is the only way that I was able to then connect her to a treatment or procedure. So I'm assuming that a veterinarian would be the same situation, but keep in mind that your person is an adopter, potentially a donor, a volunteer. So it's not just meant for the people who actually treat animals. Let's see here. Okay, on to our next screen. These are pretty straightforward. Again, just scrolling down, a lot more information we can capture about the person and those general comments fields that we also can put in here. If it's an adopter and they're banned from adopting for some reason or banned from the organization, you could always put that in there. I thought that was kind of interesting as an option. Our last screen then for iShelter is the next one here. And this shows the medical treatment information, what this looks like. You can see the dates. I guess I didn't put the date given in this situation. I just put in the date that it's needed, and I was able to set up whatever vaccines I needed. So that is kind of a nice feature. I want to point out here too, if you are on an animal profile, which I am right here, and you click on any of those little picture icons at the top, this is how they appear. They don't actually, you don't go to another screen. They appear as this little pop-up in your animal profile. So that's just a usability thing that I thought was kind of interesting. Every once in a while, I had to refresh my screen so that the whole pop-up would open. It's just like I said, a usability thing that you might notice if you play with this data. So we can move on to our next one, which is Pet Stablished. So our next screen here, Pet Stablished is interesting. They're actually owned in, their product is from the Bissell Carpet Company. They've been doing a lot of advertising on television with like vacuuming up your dog's fur. So they're interesting because obviously they don't really do much with horses, but they're very, very willing to be accommodating. So this gives you another look at the look and feel of their website, some navigation along the top and along the left. This is a screenshot that I grabbed during the demo that I was doing. I don't have a main login screen, but you get a feel for the software at least. And our next screen, the screens, I'll admit, are a little, like they lack a little bit of context, unfortunately. These were from the vendor, but there's an internal ID. There is a little bit of animal control ID information you can put in here. Some general notes. This is just behavior notes. My concern about the software is that everything just feels like big text boxes, which might be a little harder to report out on. So just keep in mind. Our next screen is more on the animal profile. This just shows microchips and internal pet documents that you can store. And our next screen here, probably the most important thing on this is our custom fields and behavioral tracking. Like I said, Pet Stablished, they'll talk with you. The developers will do as much as they can for you. They do need to add table entries for you. You cannot add table entries on your own, but I think that they're very willing to put in whatever you want. They cannot always add completely new fields. It kind of depends. So I was talking with a sales rep. She knew for sure some fields that they could add, but she wasn't sure about others. But she kept saying, let me know what you need and I'll ask our developers, just let me know. I think in one of our focus groups that somebody was starting to launch Pet Stablished and spoke to the same thing, that they were very willing. So our next screen, animal profile, just shows a little bit more information. You know, when did the pet animal or when did the pet enter your care? And the time of the type of intake is on the screen as well. I think we maybe need to advance one more screen, Emily. Yep, there we go. So this just shows you some of the other fields built into the software. And let's go one more. This is a people profile. So the same look and feel, you can track information about your person. And one more on pet established. Here's our medical history. This is what that information might look like on your screen. So our last piece of software, this is really quick, is Rescue Connection. We were kind of amused at this Black Panther jumping through a tire, but I don't have a ton of information about Rescue Connection. The person that I worked with, her name is Coral, was very, very open to delivering all sorts of information to me, but we were never really able to communicate in person. That being said, I sent her the huge list of requirements and she annotated that sheet and sent back to me every single requirement and what component of the software you would need in order to meet that requirement to a high level. So she also similarly sent me some screenshots, very, very nicely annotated. I'm sure you cannot really read her annotations, but again, you'll be getting the software or the presentation and you should be able to zoom in and see how she explained everything. The idea is to give you a little bit of a, you know, again, look and feel. So here's our animal profile screen. Our next one is our person profile. She has, again, everything annotated nicely. And then the very last one is a vaccination, you know, medical treatment type record. So you can take a look at what that looks like. So the next slide, and we're getting it to the end here. So I know we're running a little low on time, but we're getting there. So we're very close. Here's our red, yellow, green light again. So I wanted to talk about these just a little bit more. So these are the key differences. These are the things that set the software apart from all the other, you know, sets one software apart from all the other ones. So my general rule for cost, if the software costs annually between $0 and $499 a year, I gave it a green dot. If it was 500 to 1,000, it's yellow. And if it's over 1,000, it's red. So just to give you an idea of what do I mean by this? So intake volume, if your intake volume is low or the software seemed like it would really handle intake volume well, then it has a green dot. The only reason Barn Managers is yellow is that it's designed to manage barns and it might lack the ability to record everything that you might need. Again, I didn't have the ability to get into it as deeply as I would have liked. So it might serve your purposes just fine, but all the others are software for shelters. So they definitely meet that intake requirement. So staff needs refers to the amount of time that staff might need to spend setting up and configuring the system, learning how to use it, doing ongoing maintenance. The plus and minus of something like Shelter Manager, very configurable, but that means you need to be very thoughtful about how you do configure it. So don't overthink it, don't overcode things. So pretty much everything has a yellow. Rescue Connection, I wasn't really able to evaluate. And then Barn Manager, it's not super configurable, so you kind of get what you get, and that's why it's a green box, because it won't take your staff much time. Pet Finder is really pretty straightforward. If the software integrates with a lot of Pet Finder services, it's green. If they focused on like, we integrate with these 2 or 3 services, then they're yellow. And if it's red, it means there's no integration at all, which is not a surprise for Barn Manager. It's not meant to be a shelter software. For adoption activity, if it's really meant to handle adoption activity relatively efficiently without a lot of clicking around, then it's green. Anything that seemed to require some workarounds or a lot of bouncing around in the software has a yellow button or light or circle. Some of the organizations that we met with had needed some higher level of law enforcement engagement. So anything that does handle it well, mainly Rescue Connection, has a whole optional module just for that type of software tracking that has a green button. Pet Established doesn't really do that to a large extent, nor does Barn Manager. Shelter Manager and iShelters had something, but it didn't look like it was very robust. So that gives you some insight there. Next slide, just an overview of some customer support. I don't know that I'll spend a ton of time here because you can study this later. Basically, customer support's included in everything without an additional cost. I also did not see anything to indicate that you could get better support for a higher cost, so that's nice. Every single one of the softwares offers some sort of online test or a free trial, so that's always helpful too. Our next slide. So what do? We've got all this information. So you will get the PowerPoint slides, so definitely review those. We also collected all of our data on possible candidates and put them into an Airtable, which is a cloud-based collaboration kind of aggregation tool. So you'll be able to click on that overview link and go to an overview that highlights some key points about software for the possible candidates, and then gives you all the nitty-gritty details on the possible candidates. We also kept all the data on, I hate to call it rejected candidates, but the ones we thought weren't really the best fit for the most organizations. It does not, again, mean that they won't be a good fit for you, but we have the overview link as well as a detail link on those as well. So after you look at our research again, think about your specific needs. What's your budget? What is your staff situation? What are your requirements? Then go do some of those demo databases and free trials, come up with questions, contact vendors that might be good vendors, get input from your staff and volunteers, have the vendors demo their software, and ask even more questions. That's really the best thing you can do, is ask a ton of questions throughout the process. Our next slide, just to show you quickly, this is the contact information for anyone that I talked with. Shelter manager was because I could get in and do what I wanted, I really didn't need to talk with anybody. So I only know Rob, and he's the one who answered the info@sheltermanager.com email. And then, but I really asked him a couple of clarifying questions, and that was it. I didn't talk a lot with Carrie at iShelter either, again, because there was an online demo database, did a lot of the stuff that I needed. I did demos with Nicole at Barn Manager and Trisha at Pet Stablished. And then Coral, as I said, was very, very responsive, just not in person. She seems to have kind of an odd schedule. So we are now on to questions. I really didn't take much of a breath in there to let anybody interrupt if there were questions along the way. So I hope that I didn't run right over anything, and I'm happy to now entertain any questions that people might have.
I'm going to stop screen sharing so we can have it kind of as our panel view for everybody. I wrote a bunch of questions down, and we have one question in the chat, in the Q&A, that's, Karen, can you upload videos to both Shelter Manager and or Barn Manager, and are either of those usable through a mobile phone?
I know pictures you can do. I am pretty sure videos were available too. I can't say with 100% certainty. It's not something that I tried, but because they both have test systems, you'll be able to try that, I'm sure. They were fully functioning test systems for Shelter Manager and iShelter. So anything that you could look at online is what you would get if you purchased the software. Barn Manager, I never did do the trial, and so I don't know for sure. I don't know that they have quite the same ability to do videos. They, I'm sure, can do pictures, but probably not videos. So, oh, good. Okay.
Good. And another person asked, did you look at equestrianapp.com? They use it, and it's been good for them.
I did not look at that one. I think my head was so focused on the custodial and adoption that I started to lean more on that type of software. But I did not look at that one. But that's good to know. I think that's worth making a note for anybody else who wants to consider something else.
And let me just make sure no others have popped up. The other thing I'm going to do is, if you're an attendee and you're attending on your computer, you can raise your hand, and I can unmute you and you can ask a question live. Otherwise, so one question I'm going to ask Karen is, what do you think in terms of initiating use of any of these? Do you feel like any of them have much larger time commitments to start using versus other?
I think that something like Shelter Manager would definitely take a little, you probably don't need to work with somebody even to do it. I did not look into them in terms of, can you import my spreadsheet data? Again, I'm sure that they would be happy to answer the question. I just don't know on that. I think that one would take a little bit more time only because you would need to spend time really looking over the software, understanding how it's structured. It did have a nice help manual online. I actually found it very easy to navigate. It was nicely bookmarked and table of contents, and you could easily understand what they were getting at when they would write and then think back to the software. So that one I think would be a little bit more time consuming. If you were to go with something like Barn Manager, I think that would be more, again, because it's kind of restricted and you can't configure much of it, I think it would be easy to move that way.
Emily, one thing that people might want to just keep in mind as they think about experimenting is that you don't necessarily have to have every part of any piece of software up and running before you start using it. And so if you give yourself permission to not have everything done and, put in a few animals and try out, adding activities or adoption information, or just focus on getting your adoption process up and running because that's the most pressing issue for your organization, that's a totally fine approach.
Yeah, definitely. And I will say too, because Ashley and I can say from experience, swapping to a new CRM software this month, we definitely kind of hit that point where we said, okay, so it's good enough. We could fuss with it this way for the next 6 months. We need to just kind of suck it up and start using it and figure out what we like and what we need to change and what parts work for us.
And often you really can't do that unless you're using it. Doing it in theory only gets you so far.
Yeah. I think that's an important point. I mean, how many times have you moved into a house and then rearranged your furniture in like 6 months? Or, even another, and then a year later after that, you're like, this still doesn't work for me. So that applies to software too. Just be prepared for that.
And we talked about kind of the steps of initiating using software. If you had to break it down to like a three-step thing, just for people to start thinking about, what's your step one? If you've never done anything before, you have this shoebox filled with paper records, what would be your step one? Other than cry, because I think that's usually my step one to kind of figure this out.
Open the lid on the shoebox, then close it for a week, and then open it again. Debbie, do you want to take that one maybe? Or just start off?
I would say, amongst you and your team, and if your team is yourself, it's okay, sit down with your shoebox and have a good chat with yourself. What is the one thing that if you made it better would make you feel better? Like I said, you don't have to focus on everything. So if it's just keeping track of having a good list of all the animals in your care, then start with that. And I would say start with the thing that requires the least commitment. So when Karen was explaining that some of these options give you free trials, pick one. Pick one that, based on the chart, maybe looks like it's a pretty good fit. Maybe you're not sure about everything, but sign up for a free trial and just commit to yourself that you're going to enter 3 animals. And maybe just for a point of comparison, sign up for a second free trial and enter 3 animals. Because there might be something that is so obvious, even in just that quick, relatively straightforward, task, you'll realize, oh, I cannot stand this. Or, ooh, this is kind of fun. But until you actually do it, but you've made no commitment, right? You've just tried it. And that is getting you moving in the right direction without worrying about, am I going to use this software for the next 12 years?
Yeah. And I think that I know Pet Established said that they would do a trial for, I think, even 90 days. If you did the trial and then purchase the software, I'm not sure that your data would convert. So I don't think you can try to get away with 3 months free. And I'm sure that the others that offer 2-week trials, I am sure that they would be happy to extend the trial if you just really didn't feel like you could evaluate it well enough in that time frame. They're more than willing to work with you. So
that's a really good point, that it never hurts to ask, because whatever your question is, the worst that they can say is no. But if you haven't asked, then they most certainly can't say yes.
Yep. Yeah.
So we have another good question, and it's as far as the reporting for the EWDC survey, did you feel that any of these would be able to generate a report? So intake courses you took in for that month or a 6-month time period that they could kind of lay out and download and just send to us. And I'm always open to having organizations just send us reports and we can kind of figure out how to fill in the survey for them. I'm never against that at all. So do you feel like any of these softwares might be in agreement with kind of just spitting out a report of some sort?
Yeah, I am pretty sure that anyone could figure out how to run an intake list. They would probably be like intakes and reasons in one report, and then outcomes and dates in a different report. Unfortunately, I don't think you'll get everything in one report, but that's still probably better than where you are right now. I don't see any reason why, and I did play with some of the reporting. I just didn't have the time to put, 10 animals in with all sorts of different intakes and outcomes. But there definitely are reports designed specifically for that. So I don't think that would really be an issue.
And then one of my last questions is, if you're, we've talked about when we were putting this stuff together, one of the barriers is time, right? So like, and I say this when I'm trying to convince people to do the survey. We're all horse people, we get it. Especially New England, it's a blizzard on Halloween and you're going out and frantically chopping out the ice of the water troughs, and you get home and it's the end of the month and the last thing you want to do is sit down and turn on your computer and start putting in the day's records or something like that. So when we talk about time commitment, what are some things you might consider that are all different aspects of time commitment? Is it assigning a staff member, a volunteer, anticipating 4 hours a week for a small organization or 4 hours a month? When we're talking about time commitment for something like this, what do people need to keep in mind?
I think one way to think about that is to think about how you handle your work today.
Yeah.
And what the transition would look like. If you're someone who always has a clipper now, or you have some sort of app on your phone that you're, keeping stuff in now, you already have good habits that aren't such a big jump to keeping track of that in, a slightly more complex system. If you are relying on your memory now to, sit down at the end of a week or at the end of a month, that's the part that is going to be the huge jump, because the system can only generate reports if, there's no data in, there's no data coming out. And so the answer to that question, Emily, I think depends on where you're starting from. So one of the biggest habits I think you can help yourself make that adjustment is, even before you worry about the software, if you can start getting into the habit of capturing whatever you need to capture on a daily basis as you're walking around, that it will feel like less of a transition when you have the software in place.
I do think so. I have a weird analogy. When my daughter was in a 4-H program, we didn't house animals at our properties, but we housed them at a local farm where we volunteer. In our first year in the program, I found at the very end of the year that I needed to report my hours that we had spent contributing to the flock, because she raised a sheep. And then to try to go back to April, this was like probably end of August, and to try to go back to April and figure out, well, what days did we feed? And let's just assume it was 30 minutes. And wait, what days did we help clean the pen? And so I was kind of frustrated. And so that the next year, I made sure that was all blocked on my calendar and in a certain way, so that then I could more easily search my calendar. And in April, we had this many hours. In May. So I just thought, okay, I don't want to do this again next year. I don't want to be paging through my calendar and looking at sign-up sheets and things like that. So I think just taking little steps like that, trying to do a little bit more every other week, and so that you've got something on paper, so that at the end of you go from January to June. So, start now. It's okay to start now. If you're having to report to the end of December, at least you'll have November and December that you won't have to worry about. So start whenever you can, just to take off those little pieces at a time.
Great. And just as, so we're all kind of, we all have these great ideas, but just to reaffirm, it's not just the organization director or the main caretaker that needs to be in charge of this, right? So we can help find a volunteer or a donor or someone who's willing to commit those 3 to 4 hours a week, maybe, to keep the records up to date and keep everything up to date.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good way for someone to participate, you know, in addition to whatever else you have volunteers doing, for sure.
Yeah. It feels like there probably is a volunteer out there who would relish something like this. You know, they would take a lot of joy in being able to contribute more to the organization. The volunteers I've worked with always feel like they could do more. I'm like, trust me, you did a lot, but if you want to do more, I can find more.
Or maybe they can't do the physical aspect. You know, horses are much more physical for in terms of care compared to dogs and cats. So maybe they can't do the physical aspects, and this is a really good way for them to contribute.
And if the thought of keeping track of those volunteers is somewhat overwhelming, come back on Friday, where I'm going to be talking about some very specific and very low cost or free tools to help you, you know, keep track of and schedule volunteer activity.
Yes. And so we're right at 4:30. So I think we're going to start to wrap it up here. But this is a really good time. If you have any more questions, feel free to email them to me at EWDC@horsecouncil.org. And we also have, so Wednesday is a webinar directed towards non-custodial organizations. So it doesn't have to be for the whole organization. If you are not just keeping track of horses in your care, but also any safety net services you provide. So maybe you run a hay bank or a veterinary care fund or a gelding clinic, and you want to be keeping track of those records. Or maybe you also want to be keeping track of things like direct placement horses. So say you're a thoroughbred organization and you want to be keeping track of horses that you're not just taking custody of, you're helping owner to owner transfers of as well. The Wednesday webinar is going to be focused on that. So definitely register for that. Keep an eye out for it. And then Friday, again at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific, we have a volunteer management software seminar as well. So lots happening this week.
Donors too.
Donors too. Yeah. Donors too. Thank you, Debbie. And then all of this is going to be posted on our website. So we're going to be posting it on social media throughout the week, the link to the website where everything's going to go up on. But these webinars are recorded. So if you can't make it Wednesday or Friday and you still want to listen in, those will be recorded and posted as well. And we're also going to post the links to the Airtable with the overview and the detailed view of all the organizations, all 77 organizations that Karen looked through for us. And I was just saying to Ashley at the start of this, I'm so thankful we found you guys, because the thought of evaluating this on our own, I could just imagine this going on for 8 years and never ending. So you guys have, we want to give a huge thank you to you guys for taking this project on for us and working with us.
Thanks for the opportunity to work with you. It's been a tremendous amount of fun.
It really has. It's been, sometimes I just have to shift gears into it. And then as soon as I do, I don't want to stop working on it. So, but no, it's been fun. And there was a notice about, or a question about the PowerPoint presentation. I can send that to you as soon as the webinar wraps up.
Yeah, why don't you send, you can just send all 3 ahead to me and we'll post them on each. When we post the recordings, we'll post them with the recording so that way people have access to it. Okay,
yep, so those will come really quickly.
Super. So thank you all. I'm going to end the webinar here. And again, just shoot me an email at EWDC@horsecouncil.org if you guys have any questions.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.